Grand evening, day 4, therapeutic relationship. The language we use to describe ourselves and how the language that we use to describe ourselves and others to a degree, uh, how that moves us into or out of contact with self and the other. And how some of those words that we might use to describe ourselves end up becoming, can become self-flagellating, and how that the combination of the self-flagellating and the words that we use to describe ourselves inform how we think and feel about ourselves and how we act in the world. Conversely, when we use words to describe our words, phrases, terms, labels, if you will, to describe the other, the behaviors and actions of the other, the thoughts that the other might have, the way they may express those thoughts in behavior, and also the behaviors that the other might present, how we use or how we interpret that behavior and the language that we use to interpret that behavior, action, speech, presentation of the other, and how that determines how we then act towards the other. Essentially, depending on the language that we use, we would already have in mind and heart what that word means. So the word that we are using to describe the other or self has the strong potential to inform your actions and your behavior. Now, depending on where some of this language has come from, particularly when we're dealing with self, sometimes the language that we might use to describe self and self action, speech, presentation, etc., might not, and in many instances, I say this as a psychotherapist, doesn't belong to the person. It's something that has come from the outside in. So we've been looking at introjects as an example from a Gestalt point of view, or conditions of worth from a person-centered perspective. How the language that is connected to those conditions of worth, or the language that is connected to those introjects. Introjects is a good one because that informs us about our that is not just the message or the rule or the dictum that comes with the introject. There are behaviors too that are suggested and that are connected to the word. So that are connected to the word that we've introjected. So, as an example, I might refer to myself as a a stupid see you next Tuesday. I can hear some people thinking, oh, you are. Sorry, let's be serious. Then after a while, and maybe because I've heard it before, it's been said about me, I've started to believe it, so much so that I start to use that word, that phrase, to describe when I make an error, or I spill a cup of tea, or I trip over myself, or I can't remember, or I found something after not being able to remember where I'd left it, and I'd gone frantic and upset myself, and that's the phrase that I use to describe the fact that it's exactly where I thought it was in the first place, but I didn't bother to look there and looked everywhere else. So it's a way of expressing my frustration by berating myself. So, and by using those terms. So it has a process, as an action, it has the potential to inform actions and define oneself. So those are the kinds of things that we've been exploring today, not just as a theory and process, or in a technical way, but in addition then to that, in a lived way. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, to explore the impact, or beginning to say more about, when it comes into awareness of when one, as an example, being referred to as nice, a nice person, and then being nice because you feel, or you're being the nice that you imagine the person that said you were nice means, but never being too sure, but you do what you feel you need to do to be nice to fit that term, rather than being what you feel, being what you are congruent with. So somebody says that's a nice, you're nice, or there's something about you that is nice. So then your next response or action, is that based upon what's going on for you, or is it a response to what's been said to you, if that makes sense? I mean, and looking at those kinds of things. So if somebody says to you, you are, in a jokey way, that was a silly thing to do. I was going to use another word. That was a silly thing to do. Then do you giggle sillily, or do you behave sillily? Do you feel silly? And then do you act that out in some way that potentially is not how you're feeling? I don't think I'm explaining it very well. But that's the kind of thing that we've been exploring. We've been looking at notions of congruence, knowing what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and behaving and acting accordingly, even at the risk of upsetting the other. Not upsetting the other, but the other not being comfortable, or it is different, diverse, and unique to you, but is outside the unique, diverse, and uniqueness of the person standing with you, in front of you, next to you, in your company. When you are different in some way, obviously, and sometimes not so obviously, in a subtle way. And people have been learning if they can stand in their truth, whatever that might be at that moment, to risk being vulnerable, to risk looking foolish sometimes, to risk being unique, to risk being different, to risk being outside of the norm. Excuse the pun. And to be able to challenge the norm, literally and figuratively this weekend. Because I do represent, for some, and that representation is reinforced by the venue that I'm in, the fact that I am in a position of authority and therefore a position of power. So not everybody feels able to do that. And on the whole, we're not trained to do that, but I'm encouraging it. So it's good. It's been a good weekend teaching to get a sense of what it might be like to be in an easy relationship and a right relationship, getting a sense of what that might mean, to get some overstanding and some understanding of what that might mean, what that might look like, what that might feel like. What are not so much the pros and cons, but how it kind of comes up against what you've always known, and to have what it is that you've known about those ideas, about self and about awareness of self, to have that challenged, to have your perceptions challenged, to have your perceptions challenged about how you perceive yourself, how the self is perceived, to have that challenged, to have a different sense of self in a healthy way. All of this is in a healthy way, I have to say. So a little bit of a rant, a bit tired. It's been a long, engaging, intense weekend, dealing with a lot of difference and diversity and renewal, a revisiting, a reacquainting of old patterns of behaviour, old but useful nonetheless ways of thinking, remembering how the words, the labels that you'd heard earlier, previously in childhood, how they've stayed with us and how they've stayed, and the influence and the impact and the power that they've had across the course of one's existence. And begin to recognize and appreciate, and for it to be revealed that maybe they don't hold as much power as they once did. And now it's time to replace that space that is created from that awareness with something else, maybe, or not. So that's been the course of the weekend. Been a good one. Until the next time, may your ERP remain strong and healthy. Till the next time.